The year is 1962. The Department of Defense and the Joint Chief of Staffs originated a false flag project called Operation Northwoods. A false flag operation is an act committed with the intent to disguise the actual source of responsibility and pinning the blame on another party. CIA and other U.S. operatives to actually commit and stage acts of terrorism against American military and civilians, then blaming these acts of terrorism on the Cubans to justify war against them. The proposals in this document range from assassinating Cuban immigrants to committing violent terrorism in U.S. cities. The operation was shot down after the U.S. Department of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff brought this plan to the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, at the time. By this point, some of you may be asking yourselves how such high up positions in the U.S. government could ever conceive of a plan like this. Well, let me give you a bit more insight on the whole situation at the time. Imagine it's 1959. Fidel Castro just taking over Cuba, which wasn't great until it got worse when Castro began letting communists into the new Cuban government. He was also doing things that were slowly changing the global political context, things like improving the relations with the Soviet Union. This was during the time of the Cold War. Operation Northwoods' proposal recommended some hijackings and bombings, followed by the introduction of fake evidence that would implicate the Cuban government. The document stated that the desired result from the execution of the plan would be to place the United States in the apparent position of suffering defensible grievances from a rash of irresponsible governance from Cuba, and to develop an international image of a Cuban threat to peace in the Western Hemisphere. Now, I'll show you some of the raw documents later on, but several other proposals were included within Operation Northwoods, including real actions against various U.S. military and civilian targets. The operation recommended developing a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area and in other Florida cities and even in Washington itself. These involved the bombings of civilian targets, which was to then be blamed on the irresponsible Cuban government to paint a false image of Fidel Castro and to misinform the American public about the situation. In the document, the plan called for several steps to be taken in an attempt to provoke Cuba into an action against the United States, then blaming Cuba for hostilities carried out by the U.S. against its own military base at Guantanamo. These would be followed by executing offensive operations there against Cuban civilian targets and military emplacements. The agenda was simple. Now that we got that all out of the way, let's read from the recovered raw declassified documents. 1. Since it would seem desirable to use legitimate provocation as the basis for U.S. military intervention in Cuba, a cover and deception plan to include requisite preliminary actions, such as has been developed in response to Task 33C, could be executed as an initial effort to provoke Cuban reactions. Harassment plus deception actions to convince the Cubans of immediate invasion would be emphasized. Our military posture throughout execution of this plan will allow a rapid change from exercise to intervention if Cuban response justifies. Number 2, a series of well-coordinated incidents would be planned to take place in or around Guantanamo to give genuine appearance of being done by hostile Cuban forces. Incidents to establish a credible attack. None of these are in chronological order. So start rumors, land friendly Cubans in uniform over the fence to stage an attack, capture Cuban-friendly saboteurs inside the base, start riots near the base's main gate, all perpetuated by friendly Cubans, blow up ammunition inside the base, start fires, burn the aircraft on the air base, lob mortar shells from outside the base into the base, doing damage to their own base, capture assault teams approaching from the sea, capture militia groups which are storming the base, sabotage ships in the harbor, sink those ships in the harbor, and then throw mock funerals for the mock victims of the ships that they sank. After this, the United States would respond by executing offensive operations to secure water and power supplies, destroying artillery and motor encampments which threatened the base in Cuba. The terror campaign could be pointed at Cuban refugees seeking haven in the United States. We could sink a boatload of Cuban en routes to Florida, real or simulated. We could foster attempts on lives of Cuban refugees in the United States, even to the extent of wounding in instances to be widely publicized. Exploding a few plastic bombs in carefully chosen spots, the arrest of Cuban agents, and the release of prepared documents sustaining Cuban involvement also would be helpful in projecting the idea of an irresponsible government. A Cuban-based Castro-supported filibuster could be simulated against a neighboring Caribbean nation. In the vein of the 14th of June invasion on the Dominican Republic, we know that Castro is backing subversive efforts clandestinely against Haiti, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, and Nicaragua at present, and possible others. These efforts can be magnified and additional ones converted for exposure. For example, advantage can be taken on the sensitivity of the Dominican Air Force to intrusions within their national airspace. Cuban B-26 or C-46 type aircrafts could make a cane burning. For example, advantage can be taken of the sensitivity of the Dominican Air Force to intrusions within their national airspace. Quote unquote Cuban B-26 or C-46 type aircraft could make a cane burning raids at night. Soviet bloc incendiaries can be found. This could be coupled with Cuban messages to the communist underground in the Dominican Republic and Cuban shipments of arms which could be found or intercepted on the beach. A remember the main incident could be arranged in several forms. We could blow up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blame Cuba. We could blow up a drone, unmanned vessel anywhere in Cuban waters. We could arrange and cause such incident in the vicinity of Havana or Santiago of a spectacular result of Cuban attack from air or sea, or both. The presence of Cuban planes or ship merely investigating the intent of the vessel could be fairly compelling evidence that the ship was under attack. The nearness of Havana or Santiago would add credibility, especially to those that might have heard of the blast or even seen the fire. The U.S. could follow up on an air-sea rescue operation covered by the U.S. fighters to evacuate remaining members of the non-existent crew. Casualty list in the U.S. newspaper would cause a helpful wave of national indignation. Hijacking attempts against civil air and surface craft should appear to continue as harassment measures condoned by the government of Cuba. Concurrently, genuine deflections of Cuban civil and military air to surface craft should be encouraged. It is possible to create an incident which would demonstrate convincingly that a Cuban aircraft has attacked and shot down a chartered civil airliner en route from the United States to Jamaica, Guatemala, Panama, or Venezuela. The destination doesn't really matter. It's only to be chosen to cause a flight path that has a route across Cuba. The passengers could be a group of college students off on a holiday or other grouping of persons with a common interest to support chartering a non-scheduled flight. Takeoff times of the drone aircraft and the actual aircraft will be scheduled to allow a rendezvous south of Florida. From the rendezvous point, the passenger carrying aircraft will descend to a minimum altitude and go directly into an auxiliary field at England AFB, where arrangements will have been made to evacuate the passengers and return the aircraft to its original status. The drone aircraft, meanwhile, will be continuing to fly over the filed flight path. When over Cuba, the drone will be transmitted into an international distress frequency, a mayday message stating it is under attack by Cuban MiG aircraft. The transmission will be interrupted by destruction of the aircraft, which will be triggered by a radio signal. Remember, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. Stay safe out there, gang.